Our next speaker is Kristen Kelley, and Kristen grew up in the Chicago suburbs. She spent one semester at Columbia College, Chicago, initially pursuing a degree in fine arts before finding a better fit and more inspiration in the cultural studies program. And while at Columbia, Kristen has also completed a minor in women and gender studies, and her academic work has been primarily committed to feminist and international issues. Kristen studied abroad in Bangkok, Thailand in 2014, an experience that ignited her love for travel, as well as her interest in Southeast Asian histories and cultures. After graduating this semester, she will be moving to Barcelona, Spain, to earn her TEFL, teaching English as a foreign language certificate, and her immediate plan after that includes spending a few years traveling, teaching, and also learning. Her long-term plan includes becoming involved in nonprofit work in the fields of refugee, women's, and children's rights. The title of her presentation is Patriarchy, Empire, and Ping-Pong Shows the Political Economy of Sex Tourism in Thailand. In this project, Kristen Kelley provides us with a post-colonial feminist analysis of sex tourism in Thailand, and more specifically, she examines the ways in which Western imperialism has historically created the spatial and material conditions of possibility for the globalization of sex work, focusing her attention on the critical interrogation of the hegemonic social structures and forces which have coalesced to enable sex tourism to thrive in the country today. Among other things, the project also explores how policy making and enforcement in Thailand affects the sex tourism, as well as the ways in which activism works to change or support these policies, and also how this impacts individuals who are either trafficked into the industry or choose to participate in it freely. While Kelley focuses on the case of Thailand, her intervention has broader significance in that it reveals the multiple and complex relations between Western colonialism and imperialism, both historical and contemporary on the one hand, and global sex tourism on the other. Without further ado, Kristen.
Thank you, Jafar. In Thailand, prostitution is illegal under Thai law. However, it is estimated that anywhere between 1% and 9% of Thai women participate in sex work. While commercial sex consumption is common among Thai men, it is because of the dependence of the Thai tourism economy on commercial sex that it is not only tolerated by law enforcement, but also exists on a massive scale. Because of this, Thailand has gained a reputation as one of the world's most infamous sexscapes for Western male tourists. This project provides a cultural studies analysis of the current conditions of the sex tourism industry in Thailand by revealing and interrogating the forces that constructed this industry in Thailand and have allowed it to continue to develop, including historical and contemporary Western colonialism, imperialism, and globalization, as well as the Thai state and cultural attitudes regarding both sex work and tourism and the effects that are felt by both the industry itself and its laborers. As an American subject, my goal is to offer a feminist critique of the Western imperialism that exists when Western men enter Eastern or post-colonial spaces for the purpose of purchasing sex. While this project suggests some of the reasons as to why Thai women may choose to participate in sex work, it in no way aims to question the morality or ethics behind sex work itself. In 2014, I had the opportunity to study abroad in Bangkok, an incredibly multifaceted city that has so much to offer to all kinds of tourists. Going into the experience, I arrived with some preconceived ideas about Bangkok's infamous nightlife scene that had been formed primarily by dominant Western media representations of Bangkok and Thailand. Commercial sex is much more visible in parts of Thailand than it is in America, particularly in the tourist areas that this paper discusses, such as Soi Cowboy, Soi Nana, and Pattaya. The go-go bars cater specifically to Western men, and even though I am a woman, I found that because I am a white Westerner, the Thai people often associated me with my male counterpart and the sex tourism experience, and I found myself being ushered into ping-pong shows and even pulled into a few bars by the female bar workers. Through this experience, and especially in getting to know Thai people and culture, I became very interested in this world that exists around reenacting ideals of patriarchal colonial domination and sexualization, and in the people for whom this world is their everyday reality. The commercial sex industry in became institutionalized in Thailand during the Vietnam War. The war was an act of American imperialism in Southeast Asia. While the war was centralized in Vietnam and unofficially in parts of Cambodia and Laos, much of the world felt the heavy effects of the forceful anti-communist manifestation. While Thailand remained militarily uninvolved, the Vietnam War reshaped both Thailand's economy and relationship to the West and served as the catalyst for the militarization of the Thai state. During the war, the Thai government aided U.S. troops by making Bangkok a central site for military action. To encourage the flow of foreign capital and investment, the war was used as an opportunity to host U.S. troops on rest and recreation. According to scholar Dulcie Simpkins, quote, in the 1960s, nearly 50,000 U.S. troops were stationed near Bangkok as a result of superpower concerns about the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, specifically in Vietnam. The presence of the U.S. troops precipitated a crucial change in the scope of commercial sex, with lasting consequences for Thai women's economic roles. Although the U.S. military forces did not impose commercial sexuality on Thailand's women, militarization was a strong impetus for the development of a sex industry in Thailand, end quote. Not only was Thailand vulnerable to the circumstances of developing a sex tourism industry due to its convenient proximity to the war in Vietnam, but the racial and cultural boundaries that exist between Thailand and Western powers is what allows it for the othering of Thai women, and therefore the justification of purchasing their bodies for sexual labor. The exotification and erotification of Thai women and culture as a means of legitimizing Thailand as a sex tourism destination can be explained by Edward Said's concept of Orientalism. His theory explains the hegemonic power dynamics between the East and the West, or the Orient and the Occident, by which the East has been orientalized by Western discourse, in which it is subjected to being interpreted, defined, and then spoken for by the West. In this process of Western perception, the Orient loses its voice and therefore can easily be othered within Western discourse, which is a necessary strategy in the legitimization of colonialism. In the justification for Western men purchasing sex from a female sex worker, Orientalism becomes the key factor in the Thai sex tourism industry, as is made obvious in Western sex tourists' preference to spend the extra money to travel in order to engage in such interests. Orientalism also allows Western discourse to dehumanize Thai women by deeming them as exotic or submissive to white Western superiority. Said explains that it is through Antonio Gramsci's theory of cultural hegemony by which Orientalism is allowed to exist. Representations in existing discourse of the East as Oriental, or unquestionably different than the West, reinforces the power behind Orientalism. Since this information, to a Western audience, has been primarily produced by the West, it is easy to give access to the information that would, in fact, point out cultural binaries between the East and the West, and therefore gain Western cultural hegemony of othering the East and later consent to imperial gestures and colonization. For many sex tourists, it is much easier to justify the purchasing of commercial sex if one can separate, or other, the laborer from himself or herself. Since Orientalism is so prominent in Western-produced discourse of the East, it has become an essential tool in the development of Thailand as a sex tourism destination. In a post-colonial world, Orientalism can be used to reinforce values of colonialism at the colonizer's convenience. In order to justify sex tourism, a Western tourist may have to revisit some of the societal forces, including racism and patriarchy, which justified colonialism. Feminist scholar Jan Jindi Petman explains that, quote, dominant group men's access to the bodies of subordinated, colonized, or slave women was part of the privilege of power. These women were frequently constructed as sexual, available, promiscuous, or alternatively as passive or already abused, excusing the using men from the responsibility towards the women or their children, end quote. The construction of the colonized woman as not only different, but also as inferior, is part of the process of Orientalism. Said explains a necessary component of Orientalism as being the idea that the European identity is superior to all non-European people and cultures. In other words, it is not enough to simply other the sex worker, but she must also be made to be different in an inferior way. The sexualization of colonial dominance relies on otherness to maintain the hierarchical structure of race and gender that reinforces that dominance. Bell Hooks argues that, quote, one desires contact with the other, even as one wishes boundaries to remain intact. When bodies contact one another, touch, it is almost always a white hand doing the touching, white hands that rest on the bodies of colored people, end quote. While maintaining the colonial relationship, it is possible to have experiences of intimacy across the binary of colonizer and colonized without breaking this structure, as made possible by capitalism and the exchange between consumer and laborer. While the act of sex between colonizer and colonized seemingly would break down the barriers of hierarchy kept in place to reinforce colonial power, it is through the commodification of consensual sex, or through rape as a colonial force, by which these barriers remain intact. In the colonial situation, sex is used to reinforce colonial binaries. In terms of the sex tourism industry, the colonizing power is reinforced as superior through the exchange of capital as power. The tourist pays the sex worker for their laborer, but under the constructs of capitalism, this puts the tourist, or the consumer, in a position of control and therefore superiority. The cultural context of Thailand is that of which a Western man is enabled to exert his colonial dominance upon an Eastern woman. The colonial context opens a space to legitimize his actions through Orientalism, and therefore through the dehumanizing the sex worker. It exempts himself from the same ethic and moral dilemmas by which he may be faced in participating in sex consumerism at home in a Western country. While Western imperialism has created the necessary situation for the existence of a sex tourism industry, the Thai government and law enforcement continues to work in favor with Western interests in order to maintain its very lucrative tourism industry. The Suppression of Prostitution Act was passed in 1960 and is also known as the Anti-Prostitution Act. Under this law, all prostitution became criminalized in Thailand, whether the prostitute is participating in sex work consensually or is a victim of human trafficking. This meant that women and girls who were forced or coerced into participating in sex work had no choice in the matter, and besides facing trauma, were additionally at risk of legal punishment, including imprisonment and fines. The law also punished those who profited off of commercial sex through facilitation in any way. However, these procurers of the commercial sex industry faced approximately half the punishment than that of the sex worker. The Suppression of Prostitution Act was highly problematic, not only in that it criminalized sex work, but it also faced criticisms by Thai women's rights groups as being weak, ill-defined, and discriminatory. The fact that the punishment for the procurers was less than that of the sex worker is highly problematic, especially when issues such as human trafficking are at play. Under this section of the law, it undermines the previously instated anti-trafficking law, and that while the facilitating of human trafficking is still legal, it holds less of a criminal status than for those who are being trafficked and forced into sex work. Under the Suppression of Prostitution Act, brothel owners are punished in the most heavily. However, the law defines places of prostitution in a very vague manner, therefore making this section of the law the most difficult to enforce. Essentially, the law is designed in a way that while criminalizing all who are involved in the commercial sex industry, it targets the sex workers specifically. That is, it targets everyone involved with the exception of the customer. Due to the conflicting nature of the Suppression of Prostitution Act with the interests of the American military during the Vietnam War, in 1966, the Entertainment Places Act was introduced. The object of the Entertainment Places Act was to regulate spaces where prostitution could be enabled, specifically businesses in which female workers attend to male customers. The law required that businesses obtain a license from the local police in order to operate. While prostitution had already been criminalized, police began to turn a blind eye to prostitution operating out of licensed businesses. This law gave local law enforcement a lot of power and that enabled them to keep track of these businesses, mainly for the purpose of extorting money under the guise of requiring a license. Most importantly, though, the introduction of the Entertainment Places Act created a situation in which it was legal to both run establishments that promoted commercial sex, as well as to purchase sex, yet sex work was still illegal. When it comes to discussing sex work, it is crucial to address the ways by which people become involved in this type of labor. Sex work becomes very complicated as the lines between work and slavery become blurred, as when there is a commercial sex industry, space is created for human trafficking to exist. However, not all sex workers are victims of human trafficking, and the assumption that they are, as often perpetuated in Western discourse around sex work, can be very harmful to the sex worker's livelihood and working conditions. While some women are empowered by sex work, it is also important to note that some women make the choice to work in commercial sex within the context of limited choices for survival, which is a situation commonly seen in today's globalized world. Human trafficking is a human rights violation and therefore needs to be treated as such. Determining the amount of agency that goes into one's decision to become a sex worker is absolutely situational. However, it is important to examine the cultural, political, and economic forces that contextualize this decision-making process, or lack thereof. While women in the sex tourism industry have opportunities to earn higher wages than that of the local commercial sex industry, the disparity in wages between sex work and non-entertainment-based labor opportunities for women in Thailand is massive. One of the reasons for this is that outside of sex work, other options for labor are still highly feminized, often forms of domestic work, and therefore not as lucrative or appealing as to what male labor options may be. The context of Thailand as a major destination for sex tourists creates a space for a growing job market for participating in sex work. Thai women can take advantage of their social location within a major sex tourism hub and the Western male gaze that has been placed upon them as orientalized and fetishized, and work within the system to profit from it. However, it is important to acknowledge the factors leading up to the consideration of this decision that many women face, such as poverty, inability to find work, and needing to provide for a family. Because commercial sex is illegal in Thailand and must operate within an underground economy, there's a lack of regulation, thus creating a space for other illegal activities, such as human trafficking. Human trafficking is a fundamental human rights violation, and since so many women and children are trafficked into the sex trade, sex work and human trafficking are often closely associated with one another. Human trafficking into the sex trade in Thailand primarily victimizes poor Burmese migrants and people from the northern rural areas of Thailand, an area that is primarily populated by hill tribe people who are considered an ethnic minority. While the sex tourism industry relies on the differences constructed through the othering of Thai people and cultures by Western tourists, it is through the othering of Thailand's own minorities and neighbors that human trafficking into the sex trade is conducted. Thailand's sex tourism industry would not be able to exist to the powerful extent that it does without each of the complex factors that have been addressed in this project. Each plays a very important contributing role, either laying the foundation for this situation to come into existence or in reinforcing the survival of the industry. While media representations, cultural and political attitudes, and historical context are all necessary components of the sex tourism industry, it is the conditions that have been created in Southeast Asia by Western imperialism that have led to the dependence on a global market economy, and therefore situations of poverty that have led to Thailand's reliance on its tourism industry as one of its main resources of gaining foreign capital and its survival within the globalized world. It is only within this context that the patriarchal Western gaze is laid upon Thai women, offering them the choice of capitalizing off these colonial ideologies and societal structures, or risk being left vulnerable to the irrefutable forces of Western imperialism and the conditions that it has created within Thai society. Thank you.